He was eating goats when his first rider died. He carried the prince who should have been king and the prince who made himself one. He cried so loud at Maidenpool that every window in Jonquil's tower shattered in a single breath. And on the day he fell, the waters of the God's Eye rose as tall as the tallest tower in the 7 kingdoms to meet him. Welcome to Westeros Within, where we journey into forgotten ages, hidden legends, and ancient mysteries. This is Dragons of Westeros, Episode 8, Caraxes, the Blood Wyrm. The Dragonkeepers gave him that name when he was still young in the Dragonpit of King's Landing, before any prince had ever sat his back. They were men who had spent their whole lives with dragons, and they looked at the long red hatchling twisting among his siblings, and they called him what they saw: Blood Wyrm, a serpent the colour of fresh arterial spill, with a neck too long for his body and yellow eyes bright as hot iron. Where Vhagar was a mountain, Caraxes was a blade, long, lean, sinuous, with wing membranes running even along his legs, built for the strike and the dive. Around his skull he wore a crown of jagged bone horns, and the Dragonkeepers called him the fiercest of all the young dragons of his generation. And the first prince to come for him was the prince who was meant to sit the Iron Throne. Around the year 72 after the conquest, Prince Aemon Targaryen climbed onto the Blood Wyrm's back. Aemon was the eldest son of Jaehaerys the Conciliator, Prince of Dragonstone, his father's heir, beloved of the realm. For 20 years he and Caraxes flew together beneath the long peace of Jaehaerys' reign. A red dragon beneath a fair-haired prince was a familiar shadow on the grass of the 7 kingdoms. The future of House Targaryen was in the saddle. And then came Tarth. In the year 92 after the conquest, in the days the histories call the Myrish Bloodbath, a band of Myrish pirates had landed on the Sapphire Isle and taken half of it. Lord Cameron Evenstar held out in a hidden camp in the mountains, and the call for aid went to King's Landing. The king sent his heir. Prince Aemon flew to Tarth on the Blood Wyrm. He set Caraxes down. He went on foot into the mountains to find the Evenstar's camp. And somewhere else on the island, with the sun on his red scales, Caraxes was eating goats. 2 Myrish scouts stumbled upon the camp. One of them raised a crossbow and loosed a bolt at Lord Cameron. The bolt missed the Evenstar. It struck Prince Aemon Targaryen in the throat. The heir to the Iron Throne died there on a mountainside, cut down by a pirate's stray shot meant for another man. He had never worn the crown. He had never sat the throne. And somewhere else on Tarth, the red dragon lifted his head from his kill, and the bond of 20 years was simply gone. Aemon's brother Balon came on Vhagar and burned the Myrish ships into the tide. The body of the Prince of Dragonstone was carried home to mourn, and Caraxes went back to Dragonstone alone. For over a decade, the Blood Wyrm accepted no rider. He watched the sky above the old Valyrian seat and waited. The years piled around him. Jaehaerys grew old. Jaehaerys died. Viserys I took the Iron Throne, and then the rogue prince came. Daemon Targaryen was Balon's second son, the younger brother of the new king. Lean and sharp, where Viserys was heavy and slow, handsome and reckless and hungry. He had been born into a generation with no great dragon left to claim, and at Dragonstone there was still a red dragon waiting on the rocks. The pairing, once it was made, was terrifying. A warrior prince on the Blood Wyrm, with Dark Sister at his hip and a red serpent beneath him. Viserys named his brother Commander of the City Watch. Daemon gave every man of the Watch a new golden cloak, and from that day, the gold of their cloaks became the name of the whole brotherhood. The gold cloaks came to love him. Decades later, when the war came to their gates, their captains would say that Daemon had given them their cloaks, and they were gold whichever way you turned them. But a city was not enough. When the pirate kings of the Triarchy began to strangle the Narrow Sea, Daemon sailed with Lord Corlys Velaryon to break them. For years, the Blood Wyrm burned his way across the Stepstones, his long neck striking at the masts of galleys, his breath cooking whole pirate fleets in the water. Daemon himself cut down the Myrish prince they called the Crabfeeder, the man who had staked his captives on the tidal flats to feed the crabs as the sea came in. When the Triarchy at last bled, a driftwood crown was placed on Daemon's head, and for one strange year, a Targaryen was named King of the Stepstones and the Narrow Sea. A bored king soon wearied of such a meagre kingdom. Daemon laid his crown at his brother's feet and flew home on Caraxes. The dragon went where the prince went. He carried him to Driftmark, where Daemon wed Laena Velaryon, the Sea Lord's daughter who rode the ancient Vhagar. For a time, the Blood Wyrm and Vhagar flew together in the sky above Pentos, Red Serpent and Grey Mountain side by side, while twin daughters were born to the rogue prince in a manse far from Westeros. Laena died trying to give him a son who did not live, and at last, back in Westeros, Daemon married the woman who would break the realm, his own niece, Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen, the king's heir. They wed on Dragonstone in a quiet ceremony, and in the years that followed, above the painted table, the rogue prince and the red dragon waited for the war that everyone could feel coming. Viserys I died in the year 129. Before his body was cold, a queen named Alicent Hightower and her father crowned her son Aegon over the rightful heir. And on Dragonstone, Rhaenyra was proclaimed queen in turn. The dance of the dragons had begun. Daemon reached for Caraxes first. He flew the Blood Wyrm alone to the ruined castle of Harrenhal, the black shell Balerion had burned a century and a half before. When Caraxes landed on top of the Kingspyre Tower, the same tower where Harren the Black had burned to death in Aegon's fire, the Castellans simply bent the knee. Sir Simon Strong yielded without a blow, and the red serpent perched on the melted black stone where the ghost of Balerion's fire still lived, and the whole Riverlands saw the message. Riverlords began to declare for Rhaenyra in the weeks that followed. In the songs the small folk later sang of the war, they spoke of the red dragon of the Kingspyre as though he were a ghost of the castle himself. But Harrenhal was not the battle Daemon was waiting for. Across the Riverlands, his nephew was burning everything he touched. Prince Aemon Targaryen, the one-eyed brother of the Green King, with a sapphire set in his empty socket where his eye had once been. Aemond rode the ancient Vhagar, now older than any other living dragon in the world, so vast the ground shook beneath her landings. Together they burned towns and harvests and villages, and the Riverlands bled under their fires. Queen Rhaenyra sent Daemon to hunt him, and she gave him a partner for the work. A 17-year-old dragonseed called Nettles, who had tamed the savage brown wild dragon Sheepstealer from the rocks of Dragonstone by feeding him sheep with her own hands. For months, Daemon and Nettles hunted the sky together, red serpent and brown wild thing. They could not find Aemond. Aemond kept moving, Vhagar kept burning. And then, in the town of Maidenpool, at dawn, a raven came to Daemon from Dragonstone, and the Queen's command was written in it. Nettles was to be taken, Nettles was to be executed. Daemon thanked the maester who had brought the message. He went to Nettles before first light. He told her what the Queen had ordered. He told her to go. Sheepstealer beat his brown wings into the grey sky and carried her away. And down on the ground, left behind in the courtyard of Maidenpool, Caraxes threw back his long serpentine neck. The Blood Wyrm let out a scream that shattered every window in Jonquil's tower. It is the sound the histories remember, a dragon crying for something he would never see again. Daemon did not return to his queen after that. He did not ride to any court. He climbed onto Caraxes, and he flew back to Harrenhal, and he landed on top of the Kingspyre Tower one last time. He sent a raven to his nephew Aemond. The message was simple. He was at Harrenhal. He was alone. He was waiting. Then he walked down into the Godswood beneath the broken towers, and he found the Heart Tree, and he drew Dark Sister. Every day the sky stayed empty. Daemon cut one mark into the bark of the weirwood, one notch. The old wound of the tree bled fresh red sap around every cut, the way weirwoods do every spring. For 13 days, the rogue prince stood alone in the largest ruined castle in the Seven Kingdoms, with only the Blood Wyrm for company. For 13 days, he cut his notches, and he sharpened Dark Sister, and he waited. On the 14th day, the sky changed. Vhagar came. Aemond One-Eye was strapped to her saddle by chains. He had brought the woods witch Alice Rivers with him, the woman of Harrenhal who was said to be carrying his child. The stories tell that Aemond kissed her goodbye, and then he buckled himself into his saddle with every strap he had, fastening his own body to the back of the oldest dragon in the world. Daemon unbuckled his. He let his straps hang loose. The old warrior on the red serpent, Dark Sister across his back, no chains holding him to the saddle. Whatever he was about to do, he was going to do it free. The two dragons were set down 100 yards apart in the outer ward of Harrenhal, eyeing each other across a courtyard built for a king who had been burned alive in the same castle. The sun was sinking into the western edge of the God's Eye. The red light of it was already on the water. They took to the sky. Daemon whipped Caraxes into a climb, driving him up through the darkening air. Vhagar rose more slowly, heavy and old, circling out over the lake in ever-widening turns. Small folk for a dozen miles around looked up at the shrieks carrying across the water, and at the flashes of dragonfire flickering above the God's Eye, and many of them believed the sky itself was beginning to burn. Caraxes climbed into the red glare of the setting sun, higher, higher, into the place where the light of dusk would blind any eye trying to follow him. And then the rogue prince turned the Blood Wyrm, and the Blood Wyrm dove. The sun was on Aemond's blind side. He never saw them coming. Caraxes struck Vhagar with a piercing shriek, and his jaws closed around her long neck, and the two dragons locked together and fell. Vhagar's claws raked the Blood Wyrm's belly open. Vhagar's teeth tore a wing from his body. Caraxes did not release his grip. He bit deeper. He worried at the wound like a hound with a piece of meat, and he tore her throat out. Vhagar was dying. Caraxes was dying. Both dragons were plummeting toward the black waters of the God's Eye, wrapped in each other's blood. And then Daemon swung a leg over his saddle, and he leapt. In freefall, with both beasts locked together and falling toward the lake, the rogue prince jumped from Caraxes' back onto Vhagar's. He landed on the back of his chained nephew. He ripped the helm from Aemon's head. He drew Dark Sister, the Valyrian steel blade of Queen Visenya herself, the sword that had conquered Westeros, and he drove it down into the empty eye socket where the sapphire sat. So hard, the histories say, that the point of the blade came out the back of the young prince's throat. Then the dragons struck the water. The small folk who saw it said the gout that rose from the lake was as tall as the Kingspyre Tower itself, the tallest tower of the largest castle in the Seven Kingdoms, rising into the last red light of the sun. And then it fell, and the silence came. Vhagar sank like a stone, with Aemond still chained to her saddle, Dark Sister still thrust hilt deep through his eye. Daemon's body was never found. Some say he drowned, some say the fall killed him. The small folk of the Riverlands whispered for decades that he had survived, that a man who looked like him had been seen in the villages along the God's Eye, walking with a dark-haired woman, waiting for something. The histories give no answer. The rogue prince simply vanished into the water. But Caraxes did not sink. Gutted, with one wing torn from his body, his belly opened, his entrails trailing behind him, the Blood Wyrm swam. He dragged himself out of the water. He hauled his ruined body up the rocky bank, and then across the shore, and then into the shadow of the walls of Harrenhal, the same walls where he had perched for a year. The same Kingspyre Tower where his rider had waited 13 days, cutting notches into a heart tree. There, beneath those black walls, the Blood Wyrm finally lay down, and the last red light of the sun that had cloaked his final dive went out above him. The battle above the God's Eye became the single most told dragon story of the age. Bards sang of it, maesters wrote of it. Children in Westeros knew the story before they knew the words to describe it. A prince who leapt from one dragon to another in mid-air. A sword through an empty eye. 2 dragons falling into a lake. A red dragon crawling onto the shore to die. And when the Targaryens tried to remember who they had been before the fires of Summerhall and the madness of their last kings, they remembered the Blood Wyrm. The dragon of the prince who should have been king and the prince who made himself one. The dragon who killed the largest dragon in the world and died doing it. The red shape beneath the walls of Harrenhal. So tell me this. When the small folk said that Daemon had been seen walking along the shores of the God's Eye after the battle, do you believe them? Write it in the comments. And if you want more stories from the Dragons of Westeros, the great beasts of the dance and the ones who came before them, subscribe to Westeros Within and join me for the next chapter. Because next time, we stay inside the dance and we follow the dragon her own queen loved too much to risk. The yellow she-dragon who carried Rhaenyra Targaryen for 26 unbroken years. The dragon kept chained in a horse stable in the outer ward of the Red Keep because her rider would not fly her to war. The dragon who fought only one battle in her whole long life, the night a mob of starving small folk came for her with torches and chains in the ruined Dragonpit above King's Landing. Her name was Syrax, and when she finally flew into the last great slaughter the Dragons of Westeros would ever know.